had I thought about the fact that I was launching a trailer at USC, I probably wouldn't have given that to you. I actually did that for the JP Morgan conference because the people who go to the JP Morgan conference tend not to be our customers, so I thought maybe I should just show them what we do. I hope what you got from that was that we are not about being brandless. And we're not anti-brand, and we're not a generic brand, and we're not a no brand. We are totally a brand, but we are one that's built alongside the community that we serve. Brandless is 100% about turning the camera around and saying, like, you matter, and I don't even know you, but I know you matter, and your dog is adorable. And I want to know about your dog, and I want to hear your story, because there's got to be a story, or you wouldn't be sitting in the front row with a really cute dog. And so, like, everyone has a story, and it's sort of my desire in life to just hear them all and to tell them all on behalf of other people who may not want to tell their own story. Like, I want to be the person that just turns the camera around and spotlights the people who have great stories to tell. And so thinking about that and, like, how do you build a company that way, it's sort of inside out. It's a company that's meant to ask you to live more and brand less, and to think about what it actually means to reimagine something that is about truth and trust and transparency, one that is completely informed by the community we serve. And there's a whole bunch of data underneath that. So for all of those of you who are in Marshall, if you're not studying data science as well, you might want to pick up a few more classes before you leave campus. Because data science is at the center of everything that we do. We are an insights engine. And at the end of the day, if we do nothing, we just want to scale kindness. And for no other reason that it just feels like the right thing to do. And so we're on this mission to better everything for everyone. And I have this amazing co-founder. It started out with the idea that I wanted to build something with somebody that I have so much respect and admiration for. And so we were both doing different things at the time. I was investing and operating a company, and he was operating 2 or 3. But we lived in the same community, and we said, let's just start. And as entrepreneurs, the first meeting that we had, even though we were already friends, was I said, you know, what's keeping you up at night? Like, what problems do you want to solve? And he said, you know what's keeping me up at night? I think that if people understood what things cost versus what they paid for them, they'd be rioting in the streets. And it was right at the time that the, like, Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy this, Occupy that, but people didn't really understand that about the things they reach for every day. And he said, what's keeping you up at night? I said, well, what's keeping me up at night is that I see, like, everyone running. They're running away from government. Like, they don't want to elect their parents president. They're running away from institutions. They've lost trust. They think Bitcoin is safer than a bank. Like, what happened to trust? Because if you really understand brands, and I know you're not studying brands here, but brands are at the center of any entrepreneurial experience. A government is a brand. A school is clearly a brand, and this school does it better than anyone, to be clear. Just knowing that in my, like, onboarding as a parent, I didn't even know the parents got onboarded. We actually had training around that. I knew how to do that already, but they took it to a new level. They put it to music and everything. I said, like, everyone's running away, but, like, where are they going? Like, millennials say they don't want to buy the products they grew up with, but, like, what are they going to buy? And perennials, which is just a modern consumer thinking about changing their lifestyle choices, where are they going? If everyone's running away, like, that just feels so cold and, like, dystopian. And I just think it would be more fun if we, like, had a festival for them to show up and join us at. So that was the idea. We've been very fortunate in that we've raised a lot of capital to sort of fuel this mission. But the reason why, it very much comes to this idea that the number one factor for buyers today is price and value relationships. That 75% of Americans say they really want to do business with brands that contribute positively to society. And millennials do not want to buy the products they grew up with. But think about that 90 out of the top 100 CPG brands, consumer packaged goods brands, last year were in decline. That's like seismic. I don't know if you guys saw Jurassic Park or you remember the first film, but there was that scene in the golf cart. It wasn't as nice as a USC golf cart, but it was a golf cart. And there was a cup of water. and the camera went really tight on the water, and you started to see like ripples, and you knew the dinosaurs were coming. Like when I see that number, like that's like a tar pit waiting to swallow the industrial core of CPG. I mean, this is just Procter & Gamble. Look at this. Like all those brands that like were in your house and may still be, they're all coming apart. And so there's a lot of people that are around the edges peeling off pieces. Some have already been rolled up and bought by Unilever and others, and some are just taking share on a SKU, which is a single stock keeping unit. And some are disrupting the way you think about it because they're better for you, or they're a new brand, or even they now have an end cap at Target. But it's coming across, and the opportunity for that is huge. That's what we call a gigantic TAM, total addressable market. So when you're thinking about your business plans, the total addressable market is really important because that opportunity ain't so basic. This is not just about toilet paper. And so when we were creating it, we said, well, imagine if like Trader Joe's and Muji, I don't know if you know Muji, but it's a Japanese retailer. They're here in the States too, but they're massive in Japan. And Tom's and Uniqlo had a baby. I mean, that would be like something probably would only happen in like the USC like engineering labs. But just imagine like the DNA coming together. And actually one of my favorite things when we launched was that I think it was Well and Good said that Brandless was like if Muji and the dollar store had a wellness love child. And we didn't even tell them, never showed them that slide. And the thing that's so important that you need to know, and what I love about the shout out to follow on Instagram for the new startup, is that you can say whatever you want about a brand. Like you can write whatever plan, create great slides, but it really doesn't matter because a brand isn't what you say about yourself. It's what a friend tells a friend. And so knowing that, you got to create experiences that people want to talk about. This is a snapshot of a pop-up we did in New York in the fall. These were just some of the shelves of Brandless. But like, how did we do that? How did we create something that created such high quality and extraordinary value? And really what we did, D2C, direct to consumer, that's not a channel, that's a relationship. But it's a relationship that actually cuts out a lot of the things in the middle, and we can pass those savings along. So we took out a lot of the inefficiencies that are in the system. But like, who are we actually doing it for? I don't know, like the whole country. Well, actually right now only 48 states because we can't ship outside of the continental US. But then you say like, oh, is this like a California thing? Is this like a New York thing? No, that's where the population density is. So like, that's really important. But like, look at our fastest growing states. It's South Dakota, it's Alabama, it's Nebraska. It's our fellow Americans because they all deserve better and they shouldn't have to live in a coastal part of this country in order to have access to better stuff. And movements like this, like they're never built alone. They're built because you thought it was a good idea and you told your friend and they told a friend and they told a friend. And so one of our friends is Steph. And so, my son who's here, I don't know if you named him, I tend to not tag him, but I don't know if that applies to real life, but I will follow that rule and not name him. But he was interning at this conference that I was speaking at. And Steph, who I knew through Aisha, because I used to run a company called Baby Center, and she was becoming a mom blogger, and she asked for some advice. And he said, hey, Tina, would you come by and just tell some of these athletes like how to start a company? Because they're all going to have careers afterwards. And so there we were in San Francisco. It was like 45 of like the top greatest athletes, either on the court, like Jaylen Brown of the Celtics, who's awesome and also teaches at Harvard and is an amazing Celtic, or people like Joe Montana. No, Joe Montana. Was Joe Montana there? Son who will not be named? I think he was. And so I started to tell this story. And then Steph like stood up and said, like, mic drop, you won. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know I was competing. He's like, we're all just going to get behind you. Like, if you're scaling tangible acts of kindness, like that feels like something we should do. And they asked to invest. And I remember I was so overwhelmed that I like started to cry. And my son was like flagging me going like, because we just closed our Series B and actually the round was closed. And I was like, I'm a very honest, transparent person. And so I was like, oh, you know what? We just closed our round. And my son was like, wrong answer. That's the wrong answer. So we met later And we brought in Steph and a bunch of other amazing people, including some USC grads like Swaggy P and others. But here was why. Because they understood our purpose, and they understood that purpose can be a really key differentiator. 75% of Americans, as I said earlier, are more likely to buy things from companies that they believe contribute positively. But now let's talk about the Dow. Let's talk about NASDAQ. Companies that have purpose at their core are 133% more likely to outperform. 80% of CEOs say that their companies are going to commit to this, but less than half do. Because it's not a campaign. It's not like an idea. It's not a caboose that you slap on. You don't want to green splay your brand. And that 21% of organizations with meaningful work, like stuff that really matters, they're more profitable. So building for profit and for purpose does not mean creating more loss. And customers who know about the way we give back, because every day we give back, are 30% more likely to recommend Brandless. They purchase over 300% more often than others. The Brandless employees who report that the meaning and purpose of our intention as a company is a huge part of why they're there. And that emails mentioning our give back are our highest performing emails. So it's steeped in everything that we do. And to date, we've donated just over 3 million meals, which I think is both something to be proud of and something that's just not acceptable, because 40 million people go hungry in this country every day. And that's within maybe 50 yards of this campus, and in every single county in this country. 40 million, this is America. What the hell? It's just not acceptable. And so together with our community, we're trying to do something really different. And the privilege to be here and to just ask you to join us in making the world a little bit better was my intention in coming. And so thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story.
Are you kidding me? This is great. We're just getting started. I can see why JP Morgan and Steph Curry jumped on board. I'm in. I know there's no room for me.
Always room. I've learned that now. I'll never say no again.
That's an interesting thing to say, because did we tell you we have a venture fund now at USC for the first time? It took 3 years to get done, and it's for students, faculty, staff, alumni, USC-related ventures. So it's interesting. We're getting some opportunities sent our way. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
It's great to
Thank
have
you for having me.
You want to turn her down a touch, please? Can we talk a little bit about maybe, give us an overview of where Brandless stands today, and then we'll go back in your career a little bit. But just sort of, that's the mission, the purpose, the why, who your customer is a little bit. But where do you stand now? Number of employees, reach, things that you can share.
Yeah, totally. So we launched Brandless on 7/11, 2017, and I remember my sons came home and said, "You do know that's free Slurpee Day?" I was like, "Oh man, I think we're good." But I didn't also know that it was Amazon Prime Day, and I was like, "Ew." Well, that ship sailed. It ended up being a really good thing, because all the media was covering them, and so we were seen to be the new incumbent, but it was totally unintentional. It was a joke. I thought it was funny that we were doing 7-Eleven because we were modern convenience, and I didn't even care if I was the only one who got the joke, which is usually how it works. Just ask family members. So we launched then. We had about 36 employees. We closed our Series B the day we launched, or we announced it the day we launched, so that's called being preempted. We weren't raising our Series B because we were just heads down trying to get 110 products out the door, launch a website from scratch, launch email from scratch, and with no beta. And I'm a tech person, so we did that with no beta because I was so focused on being stealth. And we even had a code name for the company that wasn't our real name, called Dosi. We had business cards, a LinkedIn profile, email addresses, everything, because we thought if people knew what we were doing, that they would, kind of try and get in our way. So that was 7/11/17. It's now February 13th, 2019. So let's say a little less than a year and a half. And I'm sure that math's wrong, but you get the point.
It's about that.
And so we have about 120 employees. We have over 400 products. We are not selling everything. So when we launched, everything was $3 because that was our everyday essentials assortment. And now we just launched our better professional bakeware, our better baby collection, and our better pet collection with protein first treats and nutritionals. And they're really good. Had I known, I would have brought you some. But you don't need the calm support. You got that one down. But I'll show you the other ones because they're really good. And so a lot of those assortments are $9. We are coming out with our nutritionals in a couple of weeks. And by the end of the year, we'll probably be at around 800 products, like double that. And we're going into all kinds of different things. So we're growing.
So how many sort of product categories generally are you in?
I'd say now we're in about, it depends how you slice it. We're about a little less than a dozen, and we'll be over that because housewares is growing really rapidly. Baby, pet, and then beauty, personal care, pantry staples, snacks, stationery and office. Let's see, what else? I should know this. Femme High, also known as menstrual care made with organic cotton. I'm not afraid to talk about periods because I don't know why people would be afraid to talk about that. That also feels weird because like half the population gets it, so we can just talk about it. But and we can talk about anything. Like this whole idea of false narrative is just such a waste of time. Just like it's so much more fun to just talk about the real stuff than to talk about the fake stuff.
It is sort of bizarre, some of the things that just aren't talked about. I won't start it, so I'll let you start it. But
I think I just did.
We made history. I think we made history at USC when Jessica Jackley came here. She said Jessica Jackley founded Kiva.
I love Jessica.
And we were like, can you come in? We need you in a week. She's like, yeah, if you don't mind, like, a child attached to my boob. I'm like, ha, ha, ha. She's breastfeeding in class. She had to, she's got a child. I'm like, but that's something we're willing to do. And she made a big point. I don't know if you saw that. She was oddly at TED and was asked to leave because she was breastfeeding a child, and she was there to talk about the very issue. So it became very big, and so she's like, I breastfed in a class at USC. It's fine, So it's interesting that you mentioned that, but there are a lot of things like that we just sort of take for granted and never talk about. Anyway, enough of a tangent. We'll take it out. I don't know why I got on that rant. So let's go back a little bit, and then we'll come back to Brandless. Is that okay? For a few minutes, just to give people a context. Where did you grow up? How big of a family, brothers and sisters, and what did your parents do for work when you were younger?
So I was about to kind of pretend to be Steve Martin in a movie that my boys used to quote, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm the youngest of three girls. I grew up in New York. I went to Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan. My parents were both entrepreneurs of sorts, although my mom was more of a corporate person, both in the fashion and apparel industry. And I always thought that's what I wanted to do because that's what they did. And, the kitchen table, we just talked about stuff. It was never this idea that, I just learned at the table. And I used to go to my mom's office after high school. I'd take the subway up, and she would say, as long as your homework is done, you can sit in any meeting, but only speak when spoken to. And so I got to sit in with all these awesome people who were merchandisers, fashion people, making buying and planning decisions. And I thought it was really cool. So I kind of grew up at the table of entrepreneurs and always had a seat at that table.
And what was your mother's company and role? Was she in Perry Ellis?
Perry Ellis, Anne Klein, lots of different fashion and brands, yeah.
So that was your exposure early on.
Mm-hmm.
And then where'd you go to college?
I went to University of Pennsylvania.
Go Quakers. And what did you study there?
So I really kind of wanted the Brown version of Penn. And what that means is they're like Brown, you don't have to, there's no requirements for your major. I don't know if it's still like that, but back in my time. And so Penn is super structured. And so I went to my advisor because I was like, oh my gosh, Annenberg, because there's an Annenberg on that campus too. Wharton, the graduate college, there's all these amazing things. And so is there a major where I can just do that? And so they said, yeah, there's one who hasn't like really gotten their act together yet. That was international relations. I'm like, that one. And so I was able to like spend a semester in France, study art history at the master's level, take entrepreneurial management at Wharton, do a bunch of Annenberg stuff, and then got the fundamentals of the college, which I think, you know, I'm a big believer in STEAM. So not even STEM, but I think the arts and sciences are a critical part of being a great business person, is the ability to write and talk and do all that stuff.
Sure, absolutely. And so you've got, you know, juniors, seniors, some sophomores, maybe one freshman snuck in here. What were you thinking of doing after college? Because they're thinking about that now.
I wanted to be like my mom, so I wanted to be a fashion executive. So I was like, I just want to be like her.
And so what did you do?
So she had, and I know through the USC alumni office, she had set up some informational interviews for me. And one of them was with this incredible man who had owned Donna Karan and Anne Klein. Like he was sort of like a fashion, almost like a portfolio holder from Japan. And she said, would you spend 15 minutes with my daughter? And so I went to his office, and he had, in the old days, used to go to these offices, and there was a big desk with like 2 chairs in front. I don't even know if that's like the thing anymore. And so his secretary showed me into his office, and he was running late. So I was sitting in a chair, looking at his desk, looking at his chair, and I noticed along the wall, again, this was somewhat pre-digital, there was a stack of what looked like film scripts with like words on the spine. And I was staring at the stack because I was just waiting for him to come. And I noticed that in the middle of the stack was a business plan that I wrote. Because when I was at Penn, at Wharton in the entrepreneurial management class, one of the big things that we did was they paired us up with local entrepreneurs. And so I was paired up with this group of entrepreneurs who had this technology to make videotape vending machines, kind of pre-Redbox. And I wrote that plan. And there is the plan, like sitting against his wall. So he sits down and he starts to ask me questions. And I said, you know, so lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for making the time. Before I ask you some of the questions that I would love to ask, would it be okay if I asked about something in that stack? And he said, absolutely. I said, how did you get that plan? And I pointed to the spine of the plan that I wrote. He says, oh, well, I have another business. And at that time, like, this is before seed funds were sexy. He says, we have a merchant bank and we invest in small companies. And I said, well, that one over there, I don't think that I would make that investment because there are patent issues. And he said, how do you know? I said, well, I wrote that plan when I was at Penn. And he said, really? And so he said, would you talk to my partner because we're actually looking at that deal? I said, with pleasure. And so the next day I met his partner and I never went into fashion. And that's how I got into technology and all the rest.
What was sort of your first sort of managerial mid-level senior role? Was it at iVillage or was that down the line?
No, no, it wasn't. It was actually before iVillage. So the company that we ended up investing in was because he was very friendly with the Morita family from Japan, who were the family that like had the control of Sony, and they wanted to import high definition television into the U.S. Cut a long story short, I ended up helping kind of be part of that and ended up like lobbying the American Electronics Association task force as like the youngest woman in Washington talking about tech standards for high definition TV signals. It was just one of those like witness protection program moments. But then I started advocating for HDTV in the film industry and the TV industry in Madison Avenue, and I met this incredible firm that was working with CEOs of media and technology companies. And I had been doing HGTV for about 5 years, and they said, wow, can you do for our clients what you've done for HGTV? And I said, sure. And so they brought me on to head up their entertainment and technology practice. And so I ended up at the time when Time and Warner, they used to be 2 separate companies, and they merged, and Steve Ross was the CEO. He was the CEO of Warner, and then Time and Warner merged. That logo of the ear and the eye that's now for Time Warner Cable, we did all of that work. And so I had the privilege of like sitting with this world-class CEO and being an advisor. And then the next CEO that I met was Barry Diller, when he went and bought took over QVC. And so I met him, helped him think about how to communicate that to Wall Street and to a whole bunch of other places. And one of the findings through our study was that there was this huge opportunity for unserved consumers that QVC at the time wasn't serving. And so we started another channel, and he hired me to be on the founding team.
Did I see Mindy Grossman on your deck somewhere?
She is.
Is that where you met her?
That's not where I met her. No, she's a good friend, and she is an investor, and she's now the CEO of Weight Watchers. But before that, she was the CEO of HSN, and before that, had a senior role at Nike, and she's amazing.
Yeah, started to know her through the direct what was the TV company?
HSN.
Yeah, HSN. Always mix it up with QVC. Okay, so give us a little bit about the overview of iVillage and your experience at AOL. Just overview and what you took from each place.
Yeah, so I'd say that the QVC piece has a major impact on iVillage because the founding team at Q2, which was the channel that we started, actually left to go and start iVillage. And the thing that I took from QVC, that I still take from QVC today, is that before AOL, before anybody, before Amazon, Jeff Bezos had even gotten in a car to drive west, QVC was really like the shopping juggernaut. And the thing that I found so impressive about it was the community and real-time interaction with the audience, that the community they served, and the conversations that were happening for the people who were calling in and talking to the host. And that was like a huge wake up of like, oh my gosh, you can actually talk to your customers in real time. And then we were using data to see, okay, like these are the 10 products we're going to have on this show, understanding the margin, the sell-through, the inventory on hand for each one, and then the length of the hour and how we were going to go through them all. And then when we got a great caller on the phone, we were like, oh my gosh, when that caller talks about this and their story, sales are spiking. So understanding like that was a precursor to social media. And so when we started iVillage, and we declared victory on day one. We said we're going to be the largest community for women online, because I had this passion around connecting people who were looking for community and looking for connection. And so iVillage was and became the largest at the time community for women online. And we took it public, and then it got sold to NBC. And I left to go work for someone I'd always wanted to meet my whole life. And I asked so many times, and they kept saying no. And that was Big Bird. I just thought like that would be so cool to go to Sesame Street and like meet Mr. Hooper and Elmo and all those people. And so I did. And they were not on the internet yet. And so I had the privilege of building the team that brought Sesame Street into cyberspace, 26 letters in cyberspace.
Okay.
Yeah, it was so awesome.
How long were you there?
I was there until I became pregnant with my first son. So probably 3 years.
No kidding. And you know, this group is grown up with social media, and here's the term. Tell us your unique connection to the terms social media.
You know, I'm not sure because I don't know what other people were doing at the time, but you know, a lot of people give me credit for coining the word social media. And the reason I coined it was not because I thought that was like super clever and like this guy that was probably in second grade at the time would ultimately go on to build Facebook and other things. It was more because I was trying to describe at iVillage as we were building out. I said, look, there's informational media like CNN, and there's entertainment media, and that might be Fandango, like you might want to advertise there, or it might be just movie trailers. And then there's transactional media, because like eBay and Amazon, like those are, you have engagement. And then there's service media, so that's recipes and advice and all of the how-tos. But then there's this other thing that's happening, like in chat rooms and on message boards and in text messaging. Well, at the time it wasn't text, it was buddy lists. I used to run AOL Instant Messenger, also known as AIM. And I said, like, all those conversations, we're not producing. Like, there's producers at CNN and at movie studios and at recipe sites and magazines and all of that. But social media is the thing you facilitate. but it's still media, and it's where people are going to spend the most time. And I was trying to communicate to marketers that they needed to get involved, and it was a new form of media. And so that was how I came up with it.
And that philosophy is sort of baked into everything you do. You said, what is a brand? It's something that your friend tells you about. It's not what you experience. I think I read somewhere that you actually had the domain name socialmedia.com, .net, and .org. So
I did.
That was before there were other suffixes, by the way. It was not easy to get .com. As an investor and partner at Sherpa Capital, I think they were mostly heavily influenced in consumer-oriented startups. What were some of the things you took from the investor's side that you've applied to your subsequent ventures?
So that's a great question. I'd say that I went into venture much the way that I sort of did the IR major, which was cross-training. Like, I had been running a bunch of media companies, digital media, technology platforms, community platforms, and I wanted to kind of walk that entrepreneurial walk again, but I wanted to see it from the investor's point of view. And so I wanted to give our entrepreneurs also an unfair advantage because I'd been building stuff for so long. And so that was my original goal. But I also wanted to teach entrepreneurs, when you think about starting companies, like especially in the tech space, like most people have ideas for what I'll call features. And so believe it or not, back in the day, like before there was something called Office or even Word, there was actually like dozens and dozens of spell checking companies. And those spell checking companies got rolled up by the word processing companies, and the word processing companies got rolled up by the operating company, by Office, and then built into just the OS. So like I was sort of a good filter for like, that's just a feature. But then there were things that I'm like, wow, that's actually could be a product. So that was like a feature that could be a product. But then I was like, well, all products aren't necessarily companies. Do we think that's actually a company, or is that just like a one-trick pony? And then what products are actually going to be companies, and then brands? And then what brands are either going to create their own categories? So you could argue that Airbnb and Uber have like created new categories of like ride sharing, home sharing, and be the leaders in those. And then ultimately the highest order of companies that I thought had the opportunity to really transform were those that were all of those things, but they were also movements. And to be able to like unlock a movement, that's like bigger than anything that you do, because then you become like a part of social change. And so that was like the framework that I used to analyze how to think about what companies I thought actually could break out, either in enterprise or in consumer. And then I was sitting around seeing a lot of features and a lot of products, but not a lot of movements. And so that's when I decided to collaborate with Ito and start Brandless.
And when you first considered Brandless, what did you envision your role as, and did it change from what you originally perceived? Were you originally supposed to be the CEO? Were you originally?
Yeah, well, it's funny. We were both acting in both of those roles because we had other jobs, and I came home one day and I was having dinner with my sons, and they said, oh, how was your day? How was your day? What did you do? What did you do? And I said, oh yeah, I interviewed a couple of CEOs. And they knew that I was still working in venture, so that wasn't unusual because you're always interviewing people for your companies, your boards, whatever. And they said, oh, that's cool. For which company? And they named some of the companies we invested in. And I said, no, this one was for Brandless. And literally it was like a mic drop, fork drop. I'm like, why would you do that? I thought you were the CEO of Brandless. I said, well, this was, my younger son was just becoming a freshman, and my older son was thinking about college, and I was the head of the Freshman Parents Association, and I was like, there's got a lot going on in this house this year. I don't know that I can really take on like a venture-backed startup. I can be on the board, I could be the chairman, I could be the advisor. And they were like, okay, just for the record, like, we're good. Like, you probably spend more time with us than most non-working moms. So, like, we're good. You can actually have something else to focus on than us. That would be like having someone else raise your kid. Like, it's not like just some company you invested in. Like, you and Ito invented Brandless. And so it was them that gave me the confidence to go do it.
So you're full-time CEO since the inception. You said people are rejecting brands and they don't want to use the same products that their parents use, and they want products to reflect their values. How did the private label movement inform the opportunity for Brandless? And explain to everyone what private label is and how it's evolved over the past maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah, so private label, do you know when you go to a store, let's call it Target, and you see, let's say, Johnson's baby shampoo, and right next to it is the Target version of that, whether it's Up and Up or whatever there. So that's, and then they literally put them next to each other on the shelf, or you see this all the time. It's like Motrin and Tylenol, and then there's like the Ibu, the Wallbuprofen, or the Acetaminophen, you know, like, and they say, and it's $3 less, but it's actually the exact same formulations. So those are private labels. Those are also known as house brands. Sometimes they call them generic brands. And that is a way that that retailer is like clawing back margin so that they can create more, more revenue that falls to their bottom line. And they usually have them almost always literally sitting on the shelf next to the national brand, because that's the way they're showing the value, because they haven't really built the brand or the relationship with the customer. They're just taking advantage of the intention, which is, oh, I'm here to get, ibuprofen, so I'll be right next to Motrin or Advil. And so that's how private label really came to be. The interesting thing is that because most, if not all, consumer packaged goods companies or pharmaceutical, OTC companies, they don't have direct relationships. Their customers are the stores. And so therefore, they can't really fight with their customers, even though they get really mad when, like, next to their brand is their private label brand. So next to the, national painkiller is the Walgreens version. But they say, how can you do that? They said, okay, then we won't carry yours. Well, then where are they going to sell it? So there's this tension that's going on at the shelf. But the challenge is that the modern consumer, millennial or perennial, has left the building. So while they're like rolling down, battling over who's going to get more shelf space, the war is actually with the consumer. And so if you're focusing on that, you're focusing on the wrong thing over time.
And you saw a movement where, 20 years ago, the private label was this much of the market and the national brand was this much. And over time, particularly in categories where people didn't care quite as much, they were more price sensitive, the private label really sort of came up. And so I'm wondering, that must have had a lot to do with the evolution and the vision for Brandless, that you see this movement and change in consumer buying patterns, and that they're not as tied to historical brands.
Well, the other thing that's really interesting is that we spent hundreds of hours, myself personally and many of our team members, literally walking the aisles of stores and watching how consumers shop. And because there's this big turnover, because I would say that you may not be a millennial yourself, but if I asked you to close your eyes and think about like opening your mom's cabinet when you grew up, and then think about what's in yours now, it's not the same brands. There may be a couple that are the same, but I guarantee you, you've likely migrated to a whole new set of consumption habits. So it's not just a millennial thing, but the challenge with private label is that, or any label, is that if people are changing their consumption habits, you want to be low sugar, you want to be gluten-free, you care about vegan, you want to know if it's been produced in a factory that has peanuts and all these other things. Is it cruelty-free? Is it clean? What are the ingredient palettes? Well, guess what? It's on a different place on every single label. So if you watch people in the aisles, they pick up the package, they turn it over, they look upside down, they're looking for something, and it's different everywhere. And then they put it back and they take a step back, and then they make that unconscious decision of what they want versus what they think they can afford. And then they move on to the next aisle. And that whole thing takes about 8 seconds. And they do it over and over again. And then if you meet them at the cash register, what happens at the cash register is after all those studies, if you start pulling things out and saying, what does this cost, what does this cost? These are the things they've actually chosen. They probably don't know. And that's like why Price is Right is still on the air like 30 years later, because people don't actually remember. And that was Ito's original point, which is if they knew what things cost. But we said, wait a second, we can create a user interface so that every product can tell their own story. And so one of the values of Brandless, if you open up any of the catalogs that we passed out and you see our labeling system, is that like a product tells its own story. Olive oil, it's organic, it's a product of Italy, but it's olive oil. It's not, there's no guy in like a gondola, like with a Venetian, scarf on, like telling you that it's olive oil. It's olive oil. That guy, like, who is that guy? I never met that guy. And if you go to Italy, I don't think they sell olive oil in the gondolas, but what does that have to do with olive oil? And so this whole idea that wherever you go, whatever you're looking at, the same interface, so that products can tell their own stories so that we can hear your story. But you have to move those other like false narratives away and actually to get to the story of the people and then put their stories back in. So that's kind of how we think about where we sit, how to tell a different story. The labeling system was a critical part of what makes Brandless meant to be just a platform for truth, trust, and transparency. Like these are the most important attributes.
And so you observed customer behavior to see the buying selection, what went into it, and to sort of do research on your customer. That's the analog version of maybe sort of some of the experience you're trying to create. Tell us the difference, because in a brick and mortar store, particularly you go go into a grocery store, go into a drugstore, and you're looking at shelf space and a huge package for a small pill because they're trying to win you at that space. You have a different space. How are you designing products to ship versus products to display?
So that's a great question, because one of our values is to build for ship, not shelf. And actually, just this week, we launched this awesome new product that I'm so excited about because we've been working on it for maybe before we started the company, before we went live, which is that if you build for ship, not shelf, then you really are going to try and not ship water. And so most cleaning products are 90% water. And so they're built for shelf, that you stack them on the shelf and they look really pretty all next to each other. But if you're building it to ship, why wouldn't you just ship an empty bottle? And you could do the water at home. And so we just launched our Capsule Collection, literally capsules, with an empty bottle. And so we get the bottle, drop the capsule in, shake it up, there's your cleaner. It's non-toxic, it's EPA Safer Choice certified, and it's just lighter and takes up less space and less weight.
Shipping, gas, all those things, mail, all those things are reduced so dramatically. It's infuriating to think of that, how much water
waste,
we ship.
Yeah.
And air. So you also try and eliminate that as well, because
we do. We're early days, so we're going to get better and better at it. My fantasy is that like our boxes would be built sort of like a Lego system or a bento box where everything like fit together perfectly. But it's going to take us a while to get there, and we don't have total control over our supply chain and our shipping and all of that. So occasionally we'll ship an extra box, or there'll be packaging in there, but our community understands that we're trying and we're in it with them, but that's absolutely our intention.
Sometimes you're positioned either in the press or when you're raising money as, taking on Amazon. How do you view Amazon as a competitor, as a synergistic member of the ecosystem, and how would you describe that?
Yeah, I always blush at that idea because I think it's such a compliment to think that I would take on Jeff Bezos. Really? Amazon's awesome, and Amazon's the everything store, and I shop there constantly when I know what I'm looking for, number one. And so Amazon is ultimate choice because they have everything. We are fighting that ultimate choice with a curated assortment built alongside the community that we serve. So we are about our community, we are about our stories, we are about the curation. So if you search up Amazon shampoo, you'll probably get 20,000 results. We have one. Might we create new ones? Well, actually, I don't know when this video is launching, but we've been developing some really cool new ones. But we'll never have 20,000. I don't even think we'll have enough to count on my right hand. And if we do launch new ones, they would have, a claim, for curly hair or for straight hair or whatever. But the idea that you're overwhelmed by choice is something that can be very overwhelming. So we are not anti-Amazon. In fact, I write Jeff in my mind little thank you notes every day, because part of what Amazon is doing that's so helpful is they are moving the modern consumer culture to shift their buying habits, and they're spending billions of dollars to do it. And that behavior change still only services in the CPG space less than 5% of the market, which means 95% of the market is all being done offline, and it's very regional. So there is so much to go around, and I think people are looking for different choices. They don't want everything from one place, and you can't get Brandless stuff anywhere but on Brandless. And being part of our community means you're part of our good news, you're part of our stories, and you're part of our tangible acts of just trying to make the world a little better. And so that's the community that we hang out with, and that's the community that we create products for, and that's the community that we try and serve. And Amazon is doing a very different thing. But I think what they're doing is amazing, and I'm a very active and engaged customer, and the more they do it, the better it is.
So you differentiate on trust, the community, transparency, and not paralyzing people with choices. I mean, how many times you've gone to Amazon, search for something, Amazon, sometimes you just have to know what you want already to get it quickly, and it's great, and it's there the next day. But how many times have you either been paralyzed by the choices or just left something in the shopping cart for months without actually buying it? So you're sort of a cleaner line to that for customers.
And our product is all exclusively Brandless, so you can't find it anywhere but on Brandless.
Speaking of that, how early did you come onto the name? And I mean, it's such a great name, because
Thank you.
To say we're Brandless, but obviously you're building a very powerful brand. Was that early on? Did you know when you got it? You're just like, that's it.
Oh, that was very, 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 very early. That's when we immediately went to the code name, because we were always Brandless.
Yeah, someone steal the name, that would suck.
Well, don't worry, I'd had the trademarks and all of that, so we were working on all of that.
You did. As a new CPG company, how students here will start apps, they'll start e-commerce plays, and obviously you're well funded, but how do you acquire new customers? How do you get people to find out about you and draw people there from other sources where they would normally buy? And describe your customer if you can.
Yeah, so that's a great question. All of those questions are great questions. I would say that the important thing when thinking about CAC, which is the cost of acquiring a customer, and then LTV, which is lifetime value, how do you take that spend and invest it, but be able to amortize it over the lifetime value of that customer? Now, a company our size and age, we don't know what our LTVs are yet, and we won't know for a while. But what we do know is we do look at repeat and then the path to loyalty. And we were very intentional. In fact, our early investors said when one or two of our categories were ready, meaning the product had been sourced and developed, and they said, why don't we just test the concept? And I said, no way. Because one of the values of Brandless, we don't want to be identified by any individual one of our products, because there's been some extraordinary companies, many of which I'm sure have spent time in this chair, like Dollar Shave Club. Michael did an amazing job and had a great outcome for himself and his investors, but they still haven't left the bathroom because they're Dollar Shave Club. And so I didn't want to be identified with one product line. We wanted to be identified with the values of what Brandless stood for, because then we wanted the community to tell us what they wanted. And so we were very intentional that way, because that would allow us, back to your CAC question, to be able to talk to people every day and be able to sell them more stuff. But if you go so specifically at one category and there's not a high replenishment rate on that product, the amortization of the cost of acquiring that customer, it's hard. And then furthermore, because of my background in media, building what we call O&Os, which is owned and operated channels. So we put a huge focus on email. And I said to my team the first few months of our live to the customers, I said, what's my number one goal? And everyone would say revenue, sales, press, whatever. I'm like, all wrong. Intention. It is our job to capture intention. They're like, what do you mean? I said, look, when people hear about us, they may not be in the mode to be shopping at that moment, but we may never get to talk to them again. So we have to capture their intention. And so I don't want anybody coming to our site that we don't get their email address. Because once we have their email address, then we have permission to actually talk to them again for free. And so then we have to figure out, well, what are we going to talk to them about? And so that's when we set off to create our whole original content platform, where we could actually have stories and conversations and their stories. Same across all of our community platforms like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and all these other platforms. But I said, if we don't capture intention, then we may never get that privilege again. But if we do capture intention, then we'll be able to amortize our CAC for whatever we spend on paid across all of the viral, organic, and reacquisition of the people who gave us their email addresses, but they haven't shopped yet.
So you heard a lot of, that was a sort of a master's class in running an online business and e-commerce play. So how many of you involved in apps or e-commerce? Raise your hands. Okay. So the beauty about an online business is you don't necessarily, you don't have to go to the drugstore and observe consumer behavior because you're watching it in data every day. And so I want to ask her what metrics she measures. She talked about CAC, customer acquisition cost. That's how much you're going to spend on advertising, marketing, promotion to draw someone to purchase your product. Customer acquisition cost. Long-term value or lifetime value of the customer is how much is that person going to spend over time and what's that worth in today's dollars, because you don't want to spend $30 to acquire someone who's only going to spend $1.50 over the course of their lifetime, right? So you're always looking at those things. Churn, those things that, when someone engages, how often do they come back? How often do they drop out? Churn is people dropping out. Be interesting how you measure intention. Like what, is it the initial engagement that we're getting their emails? That's intention. Is it the number of times?
All different levels. So the first one is how many, so we used to, the number one number I focused on was how big was our email file? How many did we acquire today? How many did we acquire the next day? And so that number is a number that I watch every single day. So that was the first one. Then we measured, AOV, which is average order value, meaning how many, because you got to buy a lot of things to get to an average order when you're selling things at $3, but now we're selling things at $9 and we'll be selling things at other prices. So AOV is something. Conversion rate of the 100 people that came to the site, how many actually checked out? What % of people actually clicked, filled their cart, and then cart abandonment? And understanding cart abandonment, meaning I went, I saw, I liked these things, but then I left. And what was interesting is that all businesses are different. You have to have the insight. So I started hearing from my friends anecdotally, oh my gosh, I added that to my Brandless box, or I added that to my Brandless box. And I'm like, well, did you not get it yet? And they said, no, there's so many new things all the time, I just keep building my box. And I thought, wow, maybe cart abandonment is something, because an average e-commerce site sells 1.3 items. Our AOVs, the amount of product we sell, is in any average order is well north of a dozen, which is unheard of in e-commerce, but given what we're selling, it makes sense. So I then said to the team, actually, don't worry so much about cart abandonment. Let's focus on box building. And then let's begin to understand how many items people want in their box before they want to send it. Not just because of shipping costs, just because the concept of just buying one organic coconut oil versus 3 snacks for this, whatever. So, and then once we understand through data of what that average number is, that's when we should focus on the abandonment. But during that period, let's just keep sending them things to add to their box and not focus on checking out. And so understanding the behavior of your audience, and even understanding what time they open their email and being able to study it so that that's when you send them email. If some people read email at 5 a.m., once you've sent them email now for a few months, you should be able to know that person opens their email at 5 a.m. Eastern time. So don't send it to them at 12 p.m. because it's just going to fall into the flow and below the scroll. Somebody else may only open their email at night, so send them email at night. You want to have that subject line that's going to have the best open rates. So understanding that it's not just about segmenting your audience, it's also about segmenting their intentions and their online shopping behaviors.
Yeah, meeting them where they are as opposed to where you need to move them. Changing consumer behavior is so difficult. It's expensive. That's why, crediting Amazon with changing behavior, you'd rather have them be paying for it than you be paying for it, because it's terrifically expensive. And every company has different metrics, but some of the ones she mentioned will be sort of universal across. I'm going to ask them to ask questions in a minute, but I want to talk about fundraising a little bit. It's a staggering amount of money that you've raised for most startups. And you've done it in, I think, 3 rounds of Series C. 50 A and B and 240, I think, in the last round. Can you share, and when you hear these numbers, it must have been so easy. She walked in, she made a pitch, and she left with $240 million. Like, share some insights into the fundraising process and what it was like, pitching SoftBank.
So SoftBank is an extraordinary company. And the head of SoftBank is a man by the name of Masa-san. But they have a great team here in the U.S. And one of their partners on that team is a guy that I've known for a while, Jeff Hausenbold. And he's a great operator. He used to be the CEO of Shutterfly, and before that, a senior leader at eBay. And then he became an investor. And so what I love about Jeff is that he gets to the whiteboard and gets up there and jams with us. And our team is very, very small. And so having investors who can also work for you, I tell them all, if you're going to invest in the company, just be prepared. I'm putting everyone to work, because why not? They're really smart, and they have so much cycle knowledge of what they've seen. And so when we were thinking of, when we launched Brandless, Jeff, who was a friend, he reached out and he said, hey, congratulations, it's exciting. And I said, yeah, you should totally come by. We'll be ready to raise money from you guys in 10 years. Because SoftBank Vision Fund was really trying to bet on real winner-take-all stakes. And they were investing in Uber and Slack and these massive WeWork, these massive companies. And he said, no, I'll totally want to come by and check it out. I'm your friend. I said, great. So he came by, and I said, I really could use your advice, because we are starting to get preempted by venture firms, and I don't know if we're ready to fundraise. And he said, you should really let us take a look at it. And I said, ha ha ha, we're literally 8 months old. And he said, no, I think, I just challenge you one thing. Tell me your real story, because I don't think you're telling me the real story. And I said, do you mean the future of modern consumption story? And he said, yeah, that story. So I was like, okay, but it scares away most people in the Valley. And he goes, we're not scared. So that's when I really told him the ship not shelf, the future of fulfillment, the future of supply chain, the future of media, and be able to create your own media and turn the camera around and all of that. And he said, we got to get you to Japan. And so Ito and I, Ito was in Australia, I was actually in Europe, and on a business trip. We got the call that Masa-san would, see us for this presentation. And so we both turn around and we're on our way to Tokyo. And Ito I didn't have any product with me, and I won't do a Brandless presentation unless people can experience the product, because it's a very immersive experience. That's why even tonight, as much as I wanted to bring, 300 things here, I thought at least bringing the catalogs, you'd start to get a sense of what we were doing. So Ito had a bunch of product, and he said, well, I'll just pack it and bring it in my suitcase, and then we'll figure it out when we get there. So we get there, we meet up in Tokyo, and I go down to Ito's hotel room, and I'm like, how are we going to get this product into the SoftBank building? And so I walked into his bathroom, and they had these very large, bath sheets. I'm like, we'll just wrap it and we'll carry it. So there we are, in Japan, the two of us, carrying what looked like a mini corpse, and trying to actually walk up into the most influential investor in the world and get through security. But then we showed them what it was, and they let us in. And then we got there early, and so we set it all up, and it looked like a little mini Brandless experience. And then we waited, and then our friends, the U.S. team, came in, and then Masa came in, and I had my laptop hooked up, and they had given me a glass of water. And you may have noticed that I tend to talk with my hands. And so I was standing up making this presentation, and I went like this, and I knocked my water over onto my laptop, and the only thing the screen said was power save. I was like, I don't see that. Like, this is my moment. I just have to keep going, as if it doesn't say power save. And so I literally pretended it didn't say power save. I was like, I've always said I can do it with a sock puppet, so I'm just going to keep going. Like, point to data that's not there, talk about market disruption that's actually not showing. It only said power save. And at that time, Ito happened to have a bath sheet on him. Like, who brings a bath sheet to a meeting? And wraps my laptop in the bath sheet, absorbs the water, reboots it, and then I click, and it was back on, and then we just kept and finished the presentation. And I like literally, and then we were escorted out, and they had other, because our American hosts were bringing in other entrepreneurs, so they had other meetings. They couldn't really talk to us right then and there. And it was only months later, like after we closed the round, I think even at our closing dinner, where we finally, I said, you've never told me, like, what did you think when I was standing there, like, talking to Power Save? They were like, we never saw anything like that before in our whole lives. And so I was laughing tonight because of the rain. I was afraid, because I didn't know if you'd gotten the thing. I was like, well, I'll just bring a towel to the meeting, because that's like a lucky thing to always have a towel ready in case your laptop gets wet.
That's good advice. That's a good takeaway right there. Just for those of you who don't know SoftBank, what is the size of their fund? The fund?
I don't know how to count that high, but it's pretty big. It's very large would be the answer. And really,
in the trillions.
Yeah, but
trillions.
The thing that's really interesting about the Vision Fund is that the Vision Fund's intention is to see the future of work, WeWork, the future of communications and business communications, Slack, the future of transportation, Uber, the future of vertical farming, Plenty, the future of hopefully modern consumption, Brandless. And so they really are placing very big bets, and a lot of what you don't see at Brandless is happening underneath the surface, which is that we're building out our supply chain, we're building out our data science and our insights engine, we're building a remarkable team and a technology stack, a commerce stack, an insights stack, a publishing stack, and then we have all of the data and profiles that go across, a community stack, et cetera. And so there's a lot that's happening as we think about the future of all of these various pieces and how do we accelerate bringing that forward.
That actually answers what you're going to be spending some of that money on. So you preempted me. I want you to get some questions from the students now. This is more fun.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Kristen. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I've learned so much, and you have an amazing story and amazing purpose behind what you do. I am curious, though, looking at your catalog and your presentation and your slideshow, can you explain the reasoning behind the white box with the TM, just how you came up with that and what that message is supposed to send?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. So that was like kind of a joke, too, in that you heard me say earlier that olive oil doesn't have a voice, and so the false narrative of somebody talking about olive oil. And so we came up with the idea that if you trademark the white box, that applesauce owns applesauce, like Mott's and Del Monte don't own applesauce owns applesauce. So we were like, we're consumerists, we're giving back applesauce its rights. And that's really why we did that. It was completely meant to be tongue-in-cheek, and we actually made it a bigger font size than you normally would, to basically say that we're claiming the rights on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves.
Great. On behalf of the products themselves.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Again, thank you for coming. So you talked about Amazon being an everything store, targeting everyone. Dollar Shave Club owns the bathroom kind of thing. Brandless, if I go there, who are you targeting? What am I coming there to buy? Because you talked a lot about millennials, and then there's diapers on the website. So who are you targeting to come to your website?
So the answer is the millennials are our muses, meaning that a millennial is what's called an FTHOH, a first-time head of household. So they are the people who are getting their first apartment, setting up their college dorm rooms, becoming new parents, et cetera, et cetera. They're the consumer core that's coming up. And so they may be our muses in that it's built for that psychographic. But the demographic, truthfully, and you saw the map that I shared, it's much broader and it's really everyone, because everyone deserves better, and the things that we are selling are the things that people reach for every day, but we're making better versions of them. So they're organic, they're gluten-free, they're kosher, they're vegan, they're protein-based, etc. So selling a better diaper that is plant-based, chlorine-free, etc., that's for somebody who's an educated consumer. They may be a new parent. Well, they're clearly a new parent. But we're the acacia wood cutting boards. It's a sustainable wood. But our toilet paper is also one of our most popular products, but it's tree-free. It's made from sugarcane and bamboo grasses because we don't think people should have to cut down trees to make toilet paper. Our coffee is fair trade. It's also organic, but we think that farmers should be paid fair wages. So it's the idea that we're curating for people who want access to better things at fair prices, and that could be anybody. And the people who have the highest consumption turns tend to be family managers because just the amount of turnovers in their house. But the target is really people who have a set of values, be it medical, they're celiac, they want gluten-free, or environmental, sustainable, etc. They believe in cruelty-free, all of the rest, but they also want value. And so putting people first, I don't really believe in cohorts, like, East Coast, West Coast, red states, blue states, young, old. It's just the intention of people who are looking for better, and they don't want to pay more for it, and they want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think that he kept his hand. I'll find you.
I'll come back around to that.
Thanks for coming again. You talked a lot about how when you were building your brand, even though you're brandless, you still had to establish your brand in building your company. And I want to know, for a company at startup stage like myself, what do's and don'ts do you have when it comes to advancing your brand? You talked a little bit about the do's, like monitoring when your customers are checking their emails, but if you could just elaborate on that as well as talk about things you should not do.
Yeah, so I would say that the moderating when they check their emails is not how you build a brand. That's how you just create more efficient spend and open rates. The how you build a brand is by listening and figuring out how you can talk to people that you think are in the target or think are interested in what you're interested in or what your company is trying to build. And just get on Facebook, get on Instagram, get on Snapchat, wherever you want to go, Reddit, etc., and just start a conversation. And listen. Listening is like one of the great dying arts. We listen more than we talk. And we really listen to like what they're talking about, and then we join the conversation or we host a conversation. And then you find your advocates. I remember that the first people who showed up on our Facebook page were the vegans of LA. I had no idea who that was. But I'm like, oh my God, the vegans of LA, like just showed up. Like, welcome, vegans of LA. And we actually decided to do our first pop-up in LA so we could go hang out with the vegans of LA. And we told everybody we were there to meet with the vegans of LA, but they can come too. Because like they were the first people that showed up. And so we got to know them really well. And we wanted to understand like what their habits were. So I'd say if you're building a brand, really be in conversation and make sure you talk to everybody. Like not a single brandless comment goes onto a social platform that does not get answered by me, by one of our community members. Like when somebody tags it or says, I just got my first brandless box, we're like, yay, like party, it's so awesome, welcome, we're so happy you're here. And so we really focus on making sure that everybody feels seen and then listening to what they want to talk about, and it builds out from there.
Hi, my name's Nate. My question is, what was it like hiring the first person who you had to put in charge of sourcing your products ethically at such very low prices? And what kind of expertise did they have to show for you to know that they were going to be capable of doing that job?
So great question, because she is still one of the senior leaders in the company and the most extraordinary person. Her name is Rachel Vegas, and Rachel ran the non-perishable grocery business at Target. So she ran a multi-billion-dollar business and she lives in Minneapolis. And so Brandless is based in San Francisco and Minneapolis. Since that time, Rachel has built a team of over 40 people in Minneapolis, and has recruited some of the most extraordinary merchants. But her track record, her experience, her grit, her like plays to win, and her remarkable passion for doing something differently. And quite frankly, I feel like, Rachel, who grew up largely in corporate America, like she had something to prove. Like she hadn't had her entrepreneurial tour of duty yet, but she had the most and has the most extraordinary experience and a huge heart. And so she was somebody that like I wanted to, and Ito wanted to, go to battle with. Somebody that we knew, we have good times, we have hard times, but her experience, her network, her relationships, and her passion for building something that was disruptive and better, and sort of formulating it in her image as she'd done for other places and other stores, but not something that she owned. And so she was an incredible first hire.
Awesome.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I feel like I've learned so much. My question to you is, I know this is an e-commerce site, but you also kind of are exploring pop-up shops and stuff like that, and you mentioned that there's nothing like experiencing a product. So do you see Brandless going into its own retail stores and opening their own brick-and-mortar shops?
I'd say that when I think about that, I'd say IRL, which is Brandless in real life. So we start with tastings, we've done pop-ups, we'll do food trucks, and eventually, can I imagine Brandless having its own retail? I can. It's just a question of, what is the right sequence for those things, and how do we think about that as part of the IRL experience? But having Brandless experiences, especially where we can hang out with our community, is like a huge part of what we do. And it's a place to create content too. When we were here in LA with the vegans of LA and lots of others, including Sophia Bush and lots of other people, we went live on Facebook like 3-4 times a day, just to talk about, nutrition and cooking. And Sophia came on to talk about her movie. She talked about like why she left her day job, just like real people, real stories. And then we broadcast that to the rest of the country so that our community could be part of it. And now we do Facebook Lives all the time, probably 5, 6, 7 a week. And any employee can do one. Just go to the set and tell them what you want to talk about. You want to go make a gluten-free pizza? Knock yourself out. So it's real people, real stories, and we're always talking to the community. But can I imagine wanting to do that in physical spaces? Definitely. It's just a question of where does that sit in the sequence and stack?
Hi, thank you for coming.
Hi, you're so welcome.
I was wondering what your favorite Brandless product is.
Oh my gosh, it's like asking me to pick my favorite child. Well, of course, it's the one that goes to this amazing institution. But I have lots of favorite Brandless products. As a mom, I cook all the time for my kids. And so I love our organic tomato sauces. The arrabbiata is great. It's like spicy, and I mix it with the tomato and basil. I also love our organic olive oil spray. But on the personal care side, I love our all clean night cream, and I love our grapefruit cleanser. I'm super into, we have a whole baking collection, and so we just launched all these really cool pans, and they're awesome. And our snacks, oh my gosh, don't even get me started on our snacks. So there's a lot of things. I think I have favorites in every category, and then I look at the things that I reorder all the time, where there's the most, where my consumption habits, we just go through a lot of it. My younger son is a football player, and he's drinking these shakes, and so we make this organic peanut butter powder that doesn't have any oil in it, but it's great in shakes. And so now we're going through bags and bags of those. So I'm ordering a lot of those. But our tinfoil is also really good. I don't know why I'm super into our tinfoil and our parchment paper. So, I mean, it runs the gamut.
Hi, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
So you talked a little bit about being partnered, or not necessarily, but just like talking with the vegans of LA. And I was wondering if you, like as a marketing strategy, if you'd ever consider partnering with another brand with similar values, or if you've thought of ideas of like how to market your product or brand more.
So I'd say that, part of being, having the privilege to be part of this movement, there's a lot of other brands that are built for profit and purpose that we call our cousins. So I just did a talk a couple of weeks ago at NRF, which is the National Retail Federation. They have a big show in New York in January, and it was, Neil Blumenthal, the co-founder of Warby Parker. We consider them like a cousin. Huge admiration for what they've built. They're like 8 years ahead of us, but we haven't done a lot of co-marketing so much yet. But would I imagine that we could do something like that? Sure, on the trade side, like when we're both giving talks about what it means to build for purpose and for profit, we do a lot of stuff like that with brands that we admire.
Hi, thanks again.
Welcome.
It's clear that you and your brand have both had a lot of success. I was wondering, what was your favorite failure or mistake in that journey to success, and why?
Favorite failure? God, there's so many. It's what hour? Trying to think. What's my favorite failure? It's like hard to have a favorite failure. It's like, what's that favorite test you failed? Well, I really don't think of that as a favorite, but one that stands out. I mean, there's been companies I've invested in where I really believed in the founders, and I really believed in the story. And I was on the board or a board observer, and it just didn't go as planned. And that was just really disappointing. And so even though I might not have been the operating leader, I was definitely like around the table. And those are crushing. Either the market conditions didn't go a certain way, or the thesis wasn't right, et cetera. So those are always really painful. I remember when, as an operator, I was running AOL Instant Messenger, and that was just when MySpace and Facebook were coming up, and AIM was like all about the buddy list, but it wasn't much more than that. And so we decided to, with MySpace and Facebook happening, we decided to build something called AIM Pages, which was, you've definitely never heard of it, because it was like an abject failure. But it it didn't take the right intention of what are people actually doing on AIM? They're hanging out with their friends and they're catching up. It's basically an asynchronous phone. And then we tried to build content into it, and that was we weren't following the natural flow of what the audience was doing there. We tried to change their behavior. And so it was a great lesson learned. But I wouldn't call it one I smile warmly thinking about those great failure days. But I'd say there isn't a day where I don't feel some form of failure. You just got to fall forward.
Hi, thanks for being here. It seems like family plays a large role or is a large focal point in your life. I was kind of curious, do you have a personal philosophy for kind of managing balance in your life? Especially when you're in that startup grind or when you're in a demanding career like it seems like you've had for a long time.
Yeah. It's a great question as well. I'd say that I don't believe in balance because I think that balance is something why set yourself up to fail? You should set yourself up to win every day. Your USC students, you've already won. You're sitting in this room right now you won. And so when I think about motherhood, that is beyond a shadow of a doubt, the thing I am most passionate about and that I care the most about more than anything else in my life are my kids, my sisters, my family. Having said that, I try and really be present where I'm present. And so I don't see balance always happening in a day. I don't always see it happening in a week. But I set up to say if coming home for dinner is really important to me. But if I can't come home for dinner, then making breakfast is really important to me. And I'm going to turn breakfast into a great meal. Your brother had chicken parm this morning, son. And because I wasn't going to be home for dinner because I'm here. So I made a 3-course breakfast. It was actually 4 courses. Breakfast this morning. Because that was the meal I wanted to put out there. So it's it wasn't write your own rules, but be present and make it awesome where you are. If you're home, put your device down and focus on your kids. or ask them to put their device down so they can focus on you, and make that time really important. And then go back to what else you were doing, but be present where you're present, and know that it's going to be about integration. And not every week is going to be perfectly balanced, and not every day is going to be perfectly balanced. But ultimately, like, figure out what your priorities are, and then make sure that your time and your intentions are investing in the things that matter the most to you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your decision to go just direct to consumer, and whether you think that will change at any point, and how that would play into like the previous question about having your own brick and mortar.
So it was my feeling that part of the earlier part of the story about building a community was really wanting to be in direct relationship. And P&G is a great company, so is Unilever. Like, they're great companies, but they've been disintermediated from the people they actually serve. Not because they're not good people, not because they didn't have good ideas, it's just that's not how the system was built. And so part of the intention was Brandless was to be in direct relationship with the people we serve. And so that's a value of Brandless's. Also, when you see the Brandless collection, and you saw some of it in the video, it just like, because we've curated it, we're able to get like 400 and plus items into like very integrated spaces to leave room for the community to be able to do other things when they gather there. If we start like racking and stacking that along with other people's things, as Rachel always says, Rachel, our head merchant, she used to oversee 48 feet of salad dressing. That's crazy. But that's what big box grocers and companies have. So that idea of being curated into just what matters is a really core tenet of Brandless. And so I don't imagine Brandless being like atomized, right, and like put into a bunch of different departments. But who knows what the future holds?
Hi, appreciate you coming and talking to us. I'm looking through the booklet, and when I see items like the $3 knife, my immediate reaction is that like can't be a high quality product, and that's probably how the market has trained me. So I'm curious how on the web you communicate to consumers that this is indeed a high quality product, and how can you like change that immediate reaction?
So lots of different ways. First, like Epicurious has written about those knives like 3 or 4 times because they really are amazing. Second of all, like maybe they shouldn't be $3. And that's something that we're always leaving out there as a possibility. But having third-party support, having the community members talk about the knives and demonstrate the knives, and then on Facebook Lives, Peter, who's the head merchant in housewares who buys and develops the knives, he goes live and like cuts watermelon, and they just slice like butter. And so the knives are great, but I think demonstrating it is really important. And that video is not that video, but any video, especially when you have a product that you have to actually demonstrate its efficacy. A lot of those experiences I take from my QVC days of knowing that demonstration is a really critical part of what makes it people see the products in use.
So thank you so much for coming. And my question was actually pretty similar. And I don't know if it is a question that you can answer, but looking from knives to potato chips to soap, keeping that all at the same price, I guess my question is, what is the average kind of profit margin for the products, if there is one? Because I mean, I know like the whole Amazon theme of spending their first 10 years never making a profit, and it did work for them to kind of push away competitors throughout that boom during the time. So just asking there, how does that kind of work for Brandless?
So couple of things. First of all, nobody buys one item at Brandless. Like, it's just because that's not how these types of products are bought and sold. So it's a blended, number one. Number two, we won't always have everything at the same price. That part of like the disruption of Brandless and the market entry of Brandless was the idea that it's simple to understand, simple to get your head around, and simple to like understand that curation and anti-paradox of choice. But as we saw with our diapers and our pet nutritionals and even our professional bakeware, like, customers are just excited about the quality and the accessibility and the stories that they get to share and be a part of it. And so as more different types of products roll out, you'll see different types of things. But in that first year, that was sort of our market entry strategy, because I knew that we couldn't afford to have like a massive national campaign. And so I was looking for like a viral coefficient to help tell the Brandless story. And so we not only looked at it as a GP, like in a gross profit perspective, we also thought of it as like part of the storytelling vehicle to actually break through and break into the market.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. A big fan of Brandless. Something you've said a lot tonight is intention. I know your company also has internal intentions, like make it better, build trust. What are those internal intentions that you connect with the most?
So every time an employee joins the company, I send them a private email that asks them to set an intention, one that they want to achieve personally, not professionally, because I know that professionally with their manager, like, we set their goals and how we're going to measure their success and their performance, but we also know they're going to spend a lot of time with us. And so being part of the Brandless family starts at home, meaning at home within our team. And so then I say, once you set that intention, I'm going to invite you to a ceremony. And in that intention ceremony, I give everybody a card. And it has like their name and then the intention they want to set. But then it has 3 other important sort of fields with TMs, of course. And it's 1, why did you set that intention? And how can your Brandless teammates support you in living that intention? And then there's a big white box at the bottom, and everybody signs it. And so we feel like we're co-creating this along with not just the community, but with our team members. Brandless isn't about me. I'm just sort of helping unlock something that I think needs to be in the world. It's about everybody who touches it and everybody who wants to be a part of it. And so we then took that idea of intentions, and most companies hopefully have a set of values, but we turned our values into our intentions. So be all in, build community, create trust, make it better. And then those are actually the filters when we're hiring. How did I pick Rachel? I picked her because she demonstrated, even though we hadn't codified those words, like, that is Rachel in a nutshell. And now we have something called better tokens. Better tokens are if you see a teammate living their intentions, one of the Brandless intentions, you get an allocation every quarter of a certain amount of meals. And you can donate those meals in honor of the person who is living the Brandless intentions. And then we have a Slack channel so that when those meals get donated to Jane from Mary, and why, you have to say why they did it. They were all in, they were building community, they were creating trust, they were doing these things. And then we celebrate that as a company, like, every week. And so we're trying to build a company that puts people first. And as I say to the team, that doesn't always mean you. It's the person who needs to be focused on at that moment. And so we're doing it in a way, and I always tell them what my intention is, and get vulnerable and share that with them, because I want people to know, like, I'm not some boss that's like sitting up there. I'm just Tina, and I'm just trying to make the world a little better.
Thank you so much for coming. We talked a lot tonight about how community is at the core of everything that Brandless does. And I'm really curious, as you transitioned out of the stealth phase as a company, how you built up that initial user base and that initial community to build that brand.
Great question. So when we went from being Dosey to Brandless with our Series A announcement. And we came out to the world, and I think it was Fortune wrote an article about us or something. And then we had 1-page website that just said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of fairly priced everything. Join us. And it had like an email thing. And that was like in January. We were launching in July. Around April, we changed that to telling a little bit more about what we were doing. We said, join us and have your friends join us too. And if you do, we'll donate meals in your honor. And so we started that viral campaign around getting people to be part of the movement before we ever told them what we were doing. And then when we launched in July, so that was maybe, let's say, April. And then by the time we got to July, and then we started going on the web and going on Instagram and like talking about that stuff to a very small base. And then when we launched, we had all those email addresses and we're like, you were the first people, here's what we're doing, like come on in. And so we started early, like seeding that and asking people to bring their friends to join us.
Great questions, great questions. I hope you're seeing some things repeat, even though we've only been in school for 5 or 6 weeks, particularly the customer discovery. You know, it's no accident that some of these businesses are really doing well because the amount of time that Tina spent observing customers, building community at prior ventures. You heard about it from Sharani. What did how many people, didn't she follow her customers home or, sort of shadowed them for weeks? Ryan at Omaze. Everybody seems to have a really in-depth understanding of their customer, who they are, and their behavior. It's interesting to watch the trajectory of Brandless and to see, Steve Jobs in his famous speech at Stanford said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You're too young to connect the dots in your life because you only have like one dot. There's no, and your first job will be the second one. Looking at your career arc, it's sort of, really things line up. Do you feel like you're sort of in the place that you were trained to be, even though it's obviously different and new every day? But don't you feel like some of the experiences that you've built really uniquely prepare you to lead this?
I think so. I mean, that's a polite way of saying that I'm old, but I'm okay with that. But no, but I am. But like, I don't think of myself that way. Like every day is like day 2. They say at Amazon every day is day 1, but I say every day is day 2 because on day 1 we listen, and on day 2 we act. And so I definitely have a lot of wisdom and experiences. And favorite failures and remarkable things that happened along the way, and a lot of really smart people that I've had the privilege to learn from, and a lot of really exciting and privileged opportunities to be able to deploy my skills against the millions and millions of people, whether it was AOL.com or messaging, like learning at scale. And so, stay humble, stay hungry, and roll your sleeves up. Like my sleeves, I guess they're always rolled because like I'm always just ready to like get into it, but and try stuff and not be afraid to try something else if that didn't work, and not be married to the outcomes. Like I take everything pretty seriously, but I try not to take it personally. Because like I have a fiduciary responsibility to my investors, to my board, and to our community to build something extraordinary. And it's not about me. And so it's just about like, what have I seen work before? Let's try that. And if that doesn't work, let's try something else. Or that might work on a Wednesday, but might not work on a Sunday. So let's try it on both days. And don't be afraid, and don't fall in love with your assumptions, because you have to be willing to like test and learn and test and learn. And don't be afraid to say you got it wrong. It's just another opportunity to get it right.
There's so many people that sort of go in, especially as a founder or a CEO, and think that they may be the person that decides at the end, but you do have to stay humble and be open to the very real possibility that you're going to be wrong a lot. And the beauty with online businesses is that you can test things in a day, in a week, and see which one works better, A/B tests. Speaking of listening, you mentioned the importance of listening. First of all, we're so glad that you're part of the Trojan family. It's really great to have you here.
I'm so glad to be part of it.
Thank
you. Anytime. Any excuse to come down and visit makes me happy.
We will provide more of those excuses. But speaking of listening, and this is the first time we've had her here, I want you to share what lessons and advice and takeaways do you remember from Tina's talk today? There are so many, and I want to give this to her when she leaves. So who's ready with a lesson or advice? Ready? And speak up loudly. Go.
The best companies create movements.
Be present where your presence
On day one, we listen, and on day two, we act.
Direct to consumer is not channeled by a relationship.
Never say no to Steph Curry.
A brand is what a friend tells a friend.
Nice.
Everyone has their own story.
Coming around. Miss anybody?
Don't fall in love with your assumptions.
People trust Bitcoin more than the banks.
They did.
Listening is one of the great dying arts.
Set your intention. Stay humble, stay happy,
A brand is not what you say about yourself, it's what a friend tells you.
know your base.
Good.
Set yourself up to win. If you do nothing else, just scale kindness.
Steam, not STEM. Be present where you're present.
Did I miss anybody? Did I miss anybody? Let's give a big hand to Tina.